Kevin Bishop had everything: money, tutors, a last name that opened doors. But inside the exam hall, he was a disaster. Every paper came back in red, every failure another nail in his father's fury. Then one night, when Kevin thought it was over, the janitor stopped him. Jean Willis. A woman no one noticed, except she noticed him. And with one secret, delivered in a whisper over a mop bucket, Kevin's entire world flipped. Grades rose. Confidence surged. His father raged. But here's the danger. Why did Jean's secret work when billions of dollars in tutors failed? And why was Charles Bishop terrified the world might hear it? If you're enjoying this story, click subscribe, like this video, and comment what time it is that you're watching this video. Now let's take it to where it all begins. On the 14th of March 2023, the Bishop mansion was unusually silent. That silence wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence you hear in a courtroom seconds before the guilty verdict is announced. Kevin Bishop, son of Charles Bishop, the billionaire tech mogul who had his own Wikipedia page before he turned 30, was sitting in the living room with a history paper in his lap. The paper had been graded in bold red ink, with a giant, merciless F that looked like it was trying to jump off the page and tattoo itself on his forehead. Charles Bishop stood across from him, arms folded, jaw tight, as if his son's failure had personally caused the Dow Jones to drop 10 points. "An F, Kevin," Charles said. "Do you realize what this means?" Kevin leaned back in the leather chair, staring at the ornate chandelier above him. "Yeah. It means Napoleon wasn't just short. He's haunting me." His father didn't laugh. Charles Bishop never laughed. He sighed the way billionaires sigh when a stock dips. Deep, theatrical, and full of insulted pride. By now, Kevin was used to this ritual. Exam after exam, report card after report card, and always the same grim headline: failure. He'd been failing since middle school, though back then teachers chalked it up to immaturity or a late bloomer. By high school, excuses wore thin. The whispers had begun. The Bishop boy isn't like his father. All that money and he can't pass Algebra 2. Maybe he'll take over the company one day, but only if calculators do the work. By the spring of 2023, Kevin had earned a reputation at Lincoln Academy as the dumb Bishop. It was cruel, but high school is crueler than Wall Street on a bad Monday. It was on one of those gray Thursdays, March 16th to be exact, that Kevin's life shifted, though he didn't know it yet. He was slumped against the row of lockers, clutching his exam paper like it was an obituary for his future. Students streamed past him, laughing, gossiping, dropping casual bombs of sarcasm. "Hey Bishop, maybe they'll invent an app that passes tests for you," one kid sneered. Kevin didn't bother replying. He'd learned silence was better than fueling the fire. And then, out of nowhere, a calm voice cut through the hallway noise. "Don't crush it," the voice said. Kevin blinked, looking up. Standing there with a mop in hand and gloves snug around her fingers was Jean Willis, the school cleaner. She was tall, with long dreadlocks that framed a face carrying both strength and a quiet, unshakable patience. Her striped uniform looked ordinary, but the way she held herself was anything but. Jean nodded toward the crumpled exam in his fists. "It's already dead. Don't make it worse." Kevin let out a short, bitter laugh. "Yeah, well, my grades died a long time ago. This is just the funeral service." Jean raised an eyebrow, leaning slightly on her mop. "Funny. But you're too young for funerals. Especially for your brain." Kevin studied her. Most adults at the school either ignored him or drowned him in pity. This woman, this cleaner, was mocking him. Gently but still. And somehow it didn't sting. "You know," Kevin muttered, "you're the first person who's ever made me laugh about this." Jean gave a small smile. "Maybe that's your problem. You're trying too hard to cry about it instead." That evening, Charles Bishop was pacing in his office, phone glued to his ear. Kevin lingered at the door, half listening. "Yes, George, I know the quarterly projections look good," Charles snapped into the receiver. "But how do I tell the board my son can't pass sophomore history? It looks bad. It looks weak." Kevin didn't need to hear more. He trudged upstairs, feeling smaller with every step. To his father, failure wasn't just academic. It was a stain on the Bishop brand. Later that night, Kevin sat at his desk, staring at a textbook. World history. From Mesopotamia to modern times. He flipped through the pages, but the words swam. Dates blurred. Battles mixed into soup. This might as well be written in Klingon, he muttered. He slammed the book shut and grabbed his phone, scrolling through memes instead. And then he remembered Jean's words in the hallway. Don't make it worse. Too young for funerals. For the first time, Kevin wondered if she might know something his father, the tutors, and the textbooks didn't. On March 17th, a Friday, Kevin found himself back in the same corridor, test in hand, trying to stuff it into his locker before anyone could see. Jean appeared again, wheeling her cleaning cart. You hiding the evidence? She asked, one eyebrow arched. Kevin sighed. If I burn it, will the school erase the grade? Doubt it, Jean said, chuckling. Fire alarms are loud, baby. And besides, you're not failing because you're dumb. You're failing because you're studying like someone else, not yourself. Kevin blinked. What's that supposed to mean? Jean leaned on the mop handle like it was a philosopher's staff. You're trying to memorize facts like they're grocery lists. But life isn't about memorizing. It's about stories. History. It's just gossip that survived centuries. Math. Puzzles someone made up for fun. Science. Curiosity dressed up in lab coats. Kevin stared at her, something sparking in his brain. Nobody had ever explained it like that. You're telling me Napoleon is basically a short guy with anger issues, and that's how I should remember him? Kevin asked. Jean smirked. Now you're getting it. Kevin laughed. A genuine, belly laugh. And for the first time in years, the weight of the Bishop name felt just a little lighter. That night, as Kevin lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake Jean's words. It's not about memorizing. It's about stories. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't broken after all. Maybe he'd just been reading the wrong way, thinking the wrong way. And maybe the woman with the mop in the school hallway wasn't just a cleaner. Maybe she was the first person who could actually teach him how to learn. By the end of March 2023, Kevin Bishop had become something of a hallway lurker. Not because he enjoyed leaning against lockers like a bad extra in a teen drama, but because he knew Jean Willis's cleaning rounds like clockwork. Tuesdays and Fridays, she'd be in the East Wing around 4 p.m., mop and bucket squeaking down the tiles. And so, on Tuesday, March 28th, Kevin waited. Stalking a janitor now? Sneered Marcus, one of his classmates, tossing a basketball in the air. Kevin shrugged. Better life advice from her mop than your GPA, Marcus. Marcus scowled, but Kevin didn't care. A month ago, he would have retreated, swallowed whole by shame. Now, he had Jean's sarcasm buzzing in his head like armor. That afternoon, Jean found Kevin standing by her supply closet. She didn't look surprised. You lost, baby? She asked, wheeling her cart past him. No, Kevin said, straightening up. I wanted to ask you something. Jean paused, one eyebrow raised. Ask away. But make it quick, I got a hallway full of gum stuck under desks. Kevin held up his latest math worksheet. Numbers circled in angry red ink. Why does this stuff feel impossible? Everyone else just gets it. I don't. Jean leaned on her mop. Sit. In the closet. Best classroom in the school. Quiet, smells like bleach, and no one judges. Kevin sat on an overturned bucket, holding his worksheet. Jean crouched beside him, scanning the problems. You're trying to memorize formulas like they're passwords, she said. But math's not passwords. It's puzzles. You ever do crosswords? Kevin shook his head. Grandma does. I hate them. Good, Jean said. Because math is the crossword you can cheat at. Numbers only fit one way. Look. She grabbed a pencil, sketching a triangle on the back of his worksheet. See this? Forget sine, cosine, tangent. Think of it as a ladder. Tall side, short side, diagonal side. Some fancy Greek just gave them nicknames so he'd feel important. Kevin snorted. So, Pythagoras was basically the first guy to play with Legos. Jean grinned. Exactly. And you just solved your first puzzle. For the next hour, Kevin forgot he was in a supply closet. Equations became riddles, angles became ladders, and algebra turned into a guessing game. Jean didn't teach the way his tutors did. She joked, she teased, she asked ridiculous questions. And yet, the numbers started making sense. When the bell rang for after-school activities, Kevin blinked at the clock. Wait, it's been an hour? Jean stood, stretching her back. Time flies when you're not at a funeral for your brain. By April 2023, Kevin's grades inched upward, not enough to make headlines, but enough that teachers noticed. So did his classmates. Yo, Bishop, did your dad buy you a brain upgrade? Marcus jeered one afternoon. Kevin smirked. Nah, just traded tutors for someone who actually makes sense. Who? Wouldn't you like to know? Rumors spread like wildfire. Some swore Kevin had a secret online AI tutor. Others insisted he was cheating. Nobody guessed the truth, that the billionaire's son was learning from the school cleaner in a mop closet. Meanwhile, Kevin's humor sharpened under Jean's influence. In history class, when asked about the French Revolution, Kevin raised his hand. It started because the king didn't understand economics. Basically, imagine Elon Musk running out of Tesla stock to sell and telling people to eat bread instead. The class erupted in laughter. The teacher raised an eyebrow but couldn't deny the accuracy. For the first time, Kevin wasn't the butt of the joke. He was the joke, but in the clever way. One rainy Thursday in April, Kevin asked the question that had been nagging him. Jean, he said as they packed up after another closet session, why are you here? You're smart. Smarter than my tutors. Why are you cleaning floors instead of teaching? Jean paused, mop in hand. For a moment, Kevin thought he'd crossed a line. Then she said quietly, life doesn't always give you the job you deserve. Sometimes it gives you the job you can get. I wanted to teach once. Life had other plans. Kevin frowned. That's not fair. Jean chuckled softly. Fair? Baby, this world is about as fair as a pop quiz on a Monday morning. But here's the secret. What you do with what you've got, that's where the power is. Kevin nodded slowly. For the first time, he realized Jean wasn't just helping him pass tests. She was holding up a mirror, showing him that failure didn't define him. It just shaped the story he'd tell. By May 2023, Kevin felt different. He didn't dread school as much. He cracked jokes in class, made connections between subjects, and even, dare he admit, looked forward to studying. One night, while reviewing history flashcards, Charles Bishop walked past his son's room and nearly dropped his scotch. Are you studying? Charles asked, astonished. Kevin shrugged. Trying a new method. What method? Kevin smirked. The sideways one. Charles didn't understand, but he didn't question it either. For the first time in years, his son looked alive. And deep down, Kevin knew this was just the beginning. Because the mop closet wasn't just a place to hide from failure anymore. It was where failure turned into possibility. And Jean Willis wasn't just a cleaner. She was his mirror, the first person who showed him who he really could be. By June 2023, Kevin Bishop's quiet improvement was no longer a secret. Teachers whispered in the staff lounge, students muttered in the cafeteria, and Charles Bishop. Well, Charles was already calculating which Ivy League schools would have the honor of carrying the Bishop name. At Lincoln Academy's midterm review, Kevin shocked everyone with a B- in history and a solid C+ in math. It wasn't academic glory, but compared to the graveyard of FS he used to bury under his bed, it was a resurrection. Finally, Charles declared at dinner that night, swirling his glass of Merlot like a man who had just saved the economy. Progress. Tell me which tutor cracked the code. I'll double his salary. Kevin hesitated, fork frozen halfway to his mouth. It wasn't a tutor. Then who? Someone at school. Charles leaned forward. Who? Kevin smirked. Trade secret. Charles Bishop did not like trade secrets. especially not when his billions weren't the ones buying them. By mid-June, Charles unleashed an army of elite tutors upon Kevin's summer schedule. There was Dr. Fontaine, a retired Oxford professor with a tweed suit so stiff it looked like it had tenure. Then came a former MIT mathematician who spoke only in equations, followed by a psychologist who believed Kevin's brain was suffering from rich kid academic lethargy. Kevin endured them all, biting back sarcasm. Dr. Fontaine, history is a series of dates, my boy. Repeat after me. 1789, French Revolution. Kevin, right, 1789, when people got tired of eating hope sandwiches. The MIT tutor, the square root of -1 is. Kevin, an imaginary number. Like my chances of enjoying this lesson. Charles beamed during each session, mistaking Kevin's sarcasm for enthusiasm. But at night, Kevin escaped back to the mop closet. Jean's laughter echoed against the bleach-stained walls as they turned lessons into stories. Your tutors, Jean said one evening, wiping sweat from her brow after a long day. They're feeding you food your stomach can't digest. I'm just showing you how to chew. Kevin grinned. And apparently sarcasm is the seasoning. Best spice there is, Jean replied. One rainy Wednesday, June 21st, Kevin finally asked what had been gnawing at him for weeks. Jean, you said once you wanted to teach. What happened? Jean leaned back on a crate of paper towels, eyes far away. I went to college. Loved literature. Thought I'd change lives in a classroom. But when my mama got sick, I had to come back home, work 3 jobs. One thing led to another. Bills don't wait for dreams, baby. Ended up here. Kevin frowned. That's not right. You're smarter than half the teachers here. Jean chuckled softly. Life's not about where you work. It's about what you do while you're there. And right now, I'm teaching you. That's good enough for me. Kevin swallowed hard. For the first time, he saw Jean not just as the cleaner who joked with him, but as someone who had given up her own shot at glory, yet never stopped sharing wisdom. Then I'm lucky you're here, Kevin said quietly. Jean smiled, patting his shoulder. Luck's got nothing to do with it. Just timing. Charles Bishop finally sniffed out the truth in early July. A board member's daughter, a sophomore at Lincoln, overheard Kevin in class. He was giving a history answer dripping with Jean's sarcasm. Basically, the Zimmerman telegram was Germany's version of drunk texting Mexico, Kevin had said. The class roared. The teacher marked him correct. By the next day, word reached Charles. On July 10th, he arrived unannounced at Lincoln Academy. He found Jean in the corridor, pushing her cart, humming quietly. You, Charles said, his voice colder than a boardroom in winter. You've been interfering with my son's education. Jean looked up calmly. Helping, not interfering. You're a cleaner, Charles snapped. Not a teacher. Stay in your lane. Jean's gaze didn't waver. My lane's wherever wisdom fits, Mr. Bishop. And your son. He's learning finally. Isn't that what matters? Charles bristled, as though her words had been a hostile takeover. He doesn't need your stories. He needs discipline, structure, excellence. Jean leaned on her mop unflinching. Funny. All that discipline and structure didn't stop him from drowning. Sometimes excellence is just remembering you can float. Charles stormed off furious. That night, he cornered Kevin in the study. You will stop meeting with that woman. Kevin stood his ground. She's the only reason I'm passing. She gets me. Charles's jaw clenched. You are a bishop. We don't learn from janitors. Kevin's voice was steady. Maybe that's the problem. The fight only fueled Kevin's determination. Through July and August 2023, he doubled down, sneaking time with Jean whenever he could. They dissected history as gossip, turned chemistry into kitchen experiments, and mocked math until it surrendered. Every subject's just a bad sitcom, Jean said once. You just gotta laugh at it until you remember the plot. Kevin laughed so hard he nearly dropped his notes. For the first time, he didn't feel like a failure. He felt like a storyteller. By September, finals loomed. The entire Bishop household buzzed with tension. Charles arranged backup tutors as though preparing for war. Kevin, however, kept his secret weapon, Jean, close. And though Charles thought he was orchestrating victory, the truth was simple. The war of expectations had already been lost. Kevin wasn't playing by Bishop rules anymore. He was learning sideways. December 15, 2023, dawned with the kind of cold that slapped cheeks and froze ambition. At Lincoln Academy, the gymnasium had been transformed into an exam hall. Rows of desks stretched endlessly, and the air smelled of pencils, sweat, and quiet terror. Kevin Bishop sat in the second row, twirling his pen like it was a dagger. Around him, students hunched over their papers, brows furrowed. For them, finals were important. For Kevin, they were life or death. His father had made that crystal clear the night before. You pass, you stay at Lincoln. You fail, you're done, Charles had said, swirling his scotch with the calmness of a man deciding whether to acquire or liquidate a company. And forget college if you can't handle this. No son of mine will embarrass the Bishop name. Kevin hadn't argued. He didn't need to. Because he had Jean. On December 14th, the night before the exams, Kevin had sneaked into the janitor's closet. Jean was waiting, mop in hand, like a general preparing her soldier. "All right, baby," she said, pointing the mop like it was a sword. "Final rehearsal. Tell me, why did the U.S. join World War I?" Kevin grinned. Because Germany basically slid into Mexico's DMs with the Zimmerman telegram, and America wasn't about to let that happen. Jean clapped. Exactly. History is gossip with guns. Okay, chemistry, Kevin said. Acid plus base equals. A marriage nobody wanted, but now you've got salt and water to raise, Jean said. Kevin laughed so hard he nearly knocked over the bleach bucket. See, you got this, Jean said. Tomorrow, don't think. Tell the story. Kevin nodded, a fire sparking in his chest. The first page of the history exam stared back at him. Question 1. Explain the causes of the French Revolution. Kevin smirked. Oh, this one's mine. He scribbled, imagine being king, broke as hell, while your people can't afford bread. So you throw parties at Versailles and pretend everything's fine. Spoiler, it wasn't. Boom. Revolution. By the time he hit the math section, his hands weren't shaking. Equations didn't look like traps anymore. They looked like riddles waiting to be solved sideways. 3 hours later, Kevin walked out lighter than air. For once, he hadn't just guessed his way through. He had understood. On January 5, 2024, the results went up. Students crowded the notice board, jostling, whispering, gasping. Kevin pushed his way through, heart pounding. His eyes scanned the list. History, B. Math, C+. Chemistry, B-. English, A-. Kevin froze. An A-. Him. Holy crap, Marcus muttered beside him. The Bishop kid passed. Like, actually passed. Kevin grinned so wide it hurt. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the school's punchline. He was proof. Teachers shook their heads in disbelief. Students whispered. And Charles Bishop? He was already texting board members about the Bishop comeback story. But the victory party didn't last long. On January 10th, Charles summoned Jean to the corridor. He didn't yell. Billionaires rarely need to. His voice was quiet, sharp enough to slice glass. You've had your fun. But this ends now. Jean looked him in the eye. Your son's success isn't about me. It's about him. I just showed him the door. He walked through it. You're a cleaner, Charles hissed. He doesn't need your mop wisdom. Jean tilted her head. Funny. None of your Oxford professors got him this far. But my mop did. Charles's face flushed. Billionaire pride bruised. Stay away from Kevin. I won't let my son's legacy be built on janitor fairy tales. Kevin overheard the whole thing. That night, he stormed into his father's study. You don't get it, do you? Kevin snapped. She didn't give me answers. She gave me a way to think. Without her, I'd still be failing. Charles leaned back in his leather chair. She doesn't belong in your world. Kevin's jaw tightened. Maybe your world's the problem. The truth hit Kevin like a revelation in that moment. Jean hadn't been teaching him facts at all. She had been teaching him how to see. The sarcasm, the sideways jokes, the stories, they weren't shortcuts. They were tools. Tools he could use on his own. For weeks after the exams, Kevin studied without Jean, testing himself. And to his shock, he could do it. He didn't need her to explain every lesson anymore. He had internalized her way of thinking. When he told Jean this in late January, she just smiled. See, baby. I was never your crutch. I was just the training wheels. Now you're riding. Kevin's throat tightened. But what if I fall? Jean's gaze was steady. Then you get up. Story's better that way. By February 2024, Kevin's reputation had flipped. Teachers praised his unique analytical style. Classmates whispered about how he turned essays into comedy routines that still scored A's. Charles, of course, tried to spin it as a Bishop family triumph. At a March investor dinner, he bragged, "Kevin's academic turnaround is proof that bishops don't quit." Kevin smiled politely but didn't correct him. The real truth wasn't for investors. It was his own. Because the secret wasn't about money, tutors, or legacy. The secret was that learning isn't about perfection. It's about connection. And Jean Willis, the cleaner with the mop and the sideways stories, had been the one to give him that gift. By the summer of 2024, Kevin Bishop was no longer the kid everyone pitied. His name wasn't whispered in the cafeteria with eye rolls or pity laughs anymore. Now, when people said Bishop, they didn't just mean his billionaire father, they meant Kevin, the kid who'd gone from failing every class to making honor roll. And while his father strutted around claiming it was a Bishop family resurgence, Kevin knew better. He knew where the spark had come from. It had come from a mop, a closet, and Jean Willis's sideways wisdom. In July 2024, Charles Bishop threw a dinner for investors at the Four Seasons. Kevin was dragged along, dressed in a tailored suit he hated. When Charles raised his glass, the speech began. "My son's academic transformation is proof that Bishop blood means resilience. When faced with challenges, we rise. We adapt. We excel." The room applauded. Kevin forced a smile, but inside, his sarcasm burned. Resilience. Adaptation. "Dad, you tried to bury the one person who actually helped me." Later that night, Charles leaned over during dessert. "You see, Kevin, you proved me right. The Bishop name is untouchable." Kevin nodded but thought to himself, "You didn't teach me that." Jean did. Back at Lincoln Academy, Jean was still cleaning corridors. Still pushing her cart. Still humming under her breath. Kevin visited her often, slipping into the supply closet between classes. "You know," he said one day in September 2024, "you could be a professor. I'd sit in the front row." Jean chuckled, wringing out her mop. "Nah. Professors don't get to tell jokes about Napoleon's height without someone writing them up. I'm fine here." "But don't you want more?" Kevin pressed. Jean gave him that steady gaze he had come to depend on. "Kevin, life isn't about where you shine. It's about who you light up. You're lit now. That's enough for me." Kevin swallowed hard. He wanted to argue, but deep down, he knew she meant it. By late 2024, Kevin stopped leaning on Jean for every study session. He tested himself, sat in the library, cracked jokes in his notes, told the story of history in his own voice. And it worked. His GPA climbed higher. He began tutoring classmates, not with drills and memorization, but with humor. Think of the Cold War as two neighbors competing over who has the bigger lawnmower, he told a group of sophomores. They laughed, but they remembered it. Word spread. Teachers noticed. Some students even nicknamed him Professor Bishop. Jean just shook her head when he told her, "Look at you teaching sideways. You don't even need me anymore." Kevin grinned. "Maybe. But I'll always need you." August 28, 2025, was a sticky summer Thursday in New York City. The sun baked the Columbia University campus as freshmen lugged boxes into dorms. Among them was Kevin Bishop, wearing a faded hoodie, a lopsided grin, and the kind of quiet confidence he never thought he'd have. He wasn't here because of his last name. He wasn't here because of money. He was here because he had finally learned how to learn. That evening, Kevin pulled out his phone and called Jean. "Guess what?" he said. "I'm officially a Columbia freshman. History major." Jean laughed. "A bishop studying gossip. Lord help us." Kevin smiled. "Thanks to you. You changed everything." "Don't give me all the credit," Jean said. "You walk through the door. I just held it open." Kevin's voice softened. "Still, you'll always be the best teacher I ever had." Jean didn't reply right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "Go write your story, baby. Make it worth telling." Kevin stood at his dorm window that night, looking over the city. He thought of the mop closet, the bleach, the sarcastic jokes that had turned failure into possibility. He thought of his father, still obsessed with legacy. And he thought of Jean Willis, the woman who had reminded him that life wasn't about being perfect. It was about finding the story in the mess. Because sometimes the greatest revolutions don't come from kings, presidents, or billionaires. Sometimes they come from a black cleaner with a mop, a smile, and one powerful secret. Learning isn't about memorizing. It's about connecting. And that was a lesson Kevin Bishop would carry. Not just through college, but through life. September 2025 was a blur of new faces, syllabi, and overpriced textbooks. Columbia University buzzed with energy. Half the freshmen thought they were prodigies. The other half were already Googling how to drop out with dignity. Kevin Bishop stood somewhere in between. He was surviving, even thriving in his first semester as a history major. He wasn't just keeping up. He was actually enjoying the work. His professors raised their eyebrows at his essays, which were peppered with sideways analogies. On one paper about the Cold War, Kevin wrote, "Imagine two neighbors who both keep buying bigger lawnmowers, but neither actually cuts the grass. That's basically the US and the USSR from 1947 to 1991. The professor scrawled in the margin, "Unorthodox, but unforgettable. A dash." Kevin chuckled when he saw the grade. He knew exactly whose voice was behind that analogy. The funny thing was, Kevin wasn't the only one benefiting from Jean's wisdom anymore. His study group had become infamous across campus. They called it sideways learning. Instead of cramming dates and formulas, they cracked jokes, told stories, and roasted history's great figures. Marie Antoinette wasn't evil, just catastrophically bad at reading the room, one girl quipped during a session. Einstein didn't discover relativity, another joked. He just wanted an excuse for being late all the time. The room would erupt in laughter, but the knowledge stuck. Students started lining up to join Kevin's group. By October 2025, he had unintentionally created a movement. On October 20th, 2025, Kevin invited Jean to campus. She hesitated at first. "Baby, college is for you, not me." But he insisted. When she arrived, students stared. A cleaner in a striped uniform walking into a Columbia lecture hall wasn't a sight anyone expected. Kevin introduced her to his study group. "This is Jean. She's the reason I'm here. Everything we do, you're hearing her method." Jean looked around the room, eyes softening as students waved and thanked her. For a moment, she was speechless. Finally, she said, "Well, I guess my mop's been teaching night school without me." The group laughed, and Kevin's chest swelled with pride. In November 2025, Kevin's sideways learning caught the attention of a student journalist. By December, the Columbia Spectator ran a feature on him. From Failure to Innovator, The Bishop Method. Kevin cringed at the title. "It's not the Bishop Method," he muttered. "It's Jean's." The article went viral anyway. Professors started dropping by his study sessions, curious about his unorthodox style. Then, in December 2025, Kevin received an email from TEDx Columbia. "We'd like you to give a talk at our spring event. Title suggestion, Learning Sideways." Kevin stared at the screen, stunned. A year ago, He'd been flunking high school. Now he was being asked to give a TEDx talk. He knew exactly who he'd invite to the front row. As winter break approached, Kevin sat in his dorm, writing the opening lines of his talk. He thought of Jean's mop, her sarcasm, her steady gaze. They told me I was failing. She told me I was just reading the wrong story. Kevin smiled to himself. The echo of Jean's wisdom was louder than ever, reaching beyond him now, shaping lives he hadn't even met yet. And deep down, he realized something extraordinary. Jean Willis hadn't just saved a billionaire's son from failure. She had started a revolution, one mop story at a time. March 3, 2026, was the day Kevin Bishop stepped onto a red circular carpet in front of 800 people, and countless more watching online. His name had been printed in glossy programs. He stood backstage, heart hammering, adjusting the mic clipped to his shirt. His palms were damp, his tie crooked. For once, his father's billion-dollar name meant nothing. He wasn't here because of Bishop blood. He was here because of Jean. And she was in the front row, still in her striped uniform, her mop leaning against her chair like an honored guest. When Kevin walked on stage, the applause nearly drowned out his nerves. He took a breath, scanning the audience until his eyes landed on Jean. She gave him the smallest nod, steady and unshakable, the same way she had looked at him back when he was crumpling failed exams by his locker. "My name is Kevin Bishop," he began, "and 2 years ago I couldn't pass a single test. Teachers wrote me off, classmates laughed, and my dad was one signature away from sending me to a specialized school for academic disasters." The audience chuckled. But then, a janitor with a mop showed me the secret I'd been missing. She didn't give me answers. She gave me a way to think. She called it learning sideways. And it changed everything. He launched into stories. Napoleon as the short man with anger issues, math as puzzles, chemistry as an unwanted marriage between acid and base. The crowd roared with laughter, then leaned in as he explained how humor made learning stick. He closed with, "I stand here today not because of money or tutors or the Bishop name. I stand here because Jean Willis reminded me that learning isn't about memorizing. It's about connecting. And connection can come from anyone, anywhere. Even a mop closet." The auditorium erupted. Standing ovation. Cameras flashed. Jean clapped quietly, her smile wide but her eyes glistening. But backstage, as the applause still thundered, a storm brewed. Charles Bishop was waiting. He had flown in from a board meeting just to watch. His face was carved into its usual stone. "That was entertaining," Charles said, voice clipped. "But why didn't you frame it as a Bishop success story? Investors would have loved it." Kevin stared at him. "Because it wasn't about you. It wasn't about us. It was about her." Charles's jaw tightened. "Kevin, people respect power, not janitors." Kevin felt the old fear rise in his chest, the weight of the Bishop legacy pressing down. But then he looked past his father, at Jean, still chatting with students who had swarmed her, thanking her, shaking her hand like she was the celebrity. "No," Kevin said, finally steady. "People respect truth. And she's the truth." Charles opened his mouth, but for once he had no reply. The video of Kevin's talk exploded online. By April 2026, it had 5 million views. Headlines read, "Billionaire son credits janitor for academic success." Social media buzzed with clips of his jokes about Napoleon and Einstein. But the real spotlight landed on Jean. Reporters swarmed Lincoln Academy, wanting to meet the mop philosopher. Students posted videos of her in the hallway, turning lessons into jokes as she cleaned. By May, she had been invited to speak at local schools, though she always shook her head. "I'm just Jean," she insisted. "Still got floors to mop." Yet the world was listening now. One evening in June 2026, Kevin and Jean sat outside a diner near campus, milkshakes in hand. "Your dad's still mad," Jean said, sipping hers with a grin. Kevin laughed. "Yeah. He keeps asking me to rebrand it as the Bishop method." "And what did you tell him?" "I told him it'll always be the Jean method." Jean chuckled, shaking her head. "Baby, it was never mine either. It was yours once you owned it. Kevin looked at her, realizing she meant it. She had never wanted the fame, never wanted the credit. She only wanted him to see himself clearly. But the world wanted her. And for the first time, Kevin wondered if Jean's quiet humility might not be able to hide her much longer. By July 2026, Jean Willis could no longer blend into the background of Lincoln Academy's polished floors. For years, she had been invisible, a mop in hand, a smile for anyone who bothered to notice. But now she was the story. Reporters camped outside the school, snapping pictures of her pushing her cart. Students whispered proudly, "That's our janitor." The principal hated it. "This is disruptive, Jean," he muttered in late July, cornering her in the corridor. "You've turned my school into a circus." Jean raised an eyebrow. "Funny. Didn't see you calling it a circus when Bishop Sr. was cutting checks for your new football field." The man sputtered, then stormed off. Jean just went back to wringing her mop. On August 12, 2026, Jean sat in a studio in Manhattan under hot lights. A popular morning show had begged her for an interview. The host leaned forward, syrupy smile plastered across his face. "Jean Willis, you've been called the mop philosopher. You helped a billionaire's son turn his life around. Tell us, what's your secret?" Jean adjusted in her chair. "Baby, there ain't no secret. I just told him the truth sideways, so it could stick. History's just gossip, math's just puzzles, chemistry's just bad marriages." The host laughed. "So you don't see yourself as a teacher?" Jean snorted. "Honey, I'm a cleaner. But cleaning's a kind of teaching too. Floors, mines, it's the same work. Just different dirt." The clip went viral within hours. Memes sprouted everywhere. One showed her holding a mop with the caption, "Professor Willis, cleaning ignorance since day one." But fame has enemies. By September 2026, Charles Bishop was furious. "Do you realize how this looks?" He snapped during a call with Kevin. "Every headline reduces us to a joke. Billionaire son saved by janitor. Our family legacy is being rewritten." Kevin's voice was calm. Maybe it needed rewriting. Charles slammed the phone down. That same week, an article appeared in a glossy business magazine, "The Dangerous Myth of the Janitor Genius." The author, an anonymous source, though Kevin recognized the phrasing, argued that Jean was a distraction, that Kevin's success came from his elite tutors and privileged resources, not mop-room fairy tales. The backlash was instant. Social media erupted. Students, parents, even professors pushed back. "No, she's the real deal." One teacher tweeted, "I've seen her methods work." Jean herself shrugged when Kevin showed her the article. "Baby, if they ain't mad, you ain't making waves." In October 2026, the call came. The UN in New York was hosting a global education summit. Representatives from over 50 countries would attend. And they wanted Jean Willis, not Kevin, not Charles, to give the keynote address. Jean nearly dropped the phone. "Excuse me. You want me?" "The janitor." "Yes," the organizer said. "The world needs to hear your perspective." Jean hung up, sat down, and whispered to herself, "Lord, what did I mop my way into?" When Kevin heard the news, he laughed so hard he nearly fell off his dorm bed. "Jean, you're about to lecture the entire world." Jean sighed. "I don't even like microphones, baby." Kevin leaned closer. "But you've been teaching me, and everyone else, without a microphone for years. The world's just catching up." Jean smiled softly. "Guess I better find a clean pair of shoes then." On November 3, 2026, as autumn leaves whipped across Manhattan, Jean Willis stood on the steps of the United Nations, mop nowhere in sight, reporters crowding for photos. For the first time in her life, the world wasn't overlooking her. The world was waiting for her words. Kevin watched from the sidelines, pride swelling in his chest. And for once, even Charles Bishop, standing stiffly in the shadows, seemed to realize that legacy wasn't built by blood or billions. Sometimes it was built by the quiet hands that had always been there, scrubbing floors and reshaping minds. Jean took a breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped toward the podium. The janitor was about to teach the world. November 4th, 2026. The United Nations General Assembly Hall. Delegates in suits filled the chamber, headsets on, translators ready. Flags from every nation lined the stage. The air carried the usual heaviness of diplomacy. Long speeches, longer silences. But today was different. Because today, the keynote speaker wasn't a prime minister or a Nobel laureate. It was a cleaner from New Jersey with a mop and a smile. Jean Willis stepped up to the podium, adjusting the microphone with the same ease she adjusted her mop handle. Kevin sat in the gallery, his heart pounding, watching history unfold. "Good morning, babies," Jean began, her voice warm, unpolished, utterly hers. A few delegates blinked, surprised by the greeting. "I ain't no politician. I ain't no professor. I'm a school cleaner, which means I know a thing or two about mess. And let me tell you, our education systems? They're messy." Scattered chuckles rippled through the hall. Jean continued. "For years, we've been teaching kids like they're machines. Feed them data, spit out results. But kids aren't machines. They're stories. And if you don't tell them the story in a way they understand, it won't stick. Might as well try to mop water uphill." Laughter this time, genuine, startled. She leaned forward. "I had a student, Kevin Bishop, Billionaire's son. Had every tutor money could buy. Still failing. Why? Because nobody connected with him. Nobody told him the story sideways. When I did, he lit up like a clean window in sunlight. Now he's at Columbia, teaching other kids. Not because of me. Because somebody finally bothered to see him." The room was silent. Even the translators paused for a heartbeat before catching up. Jean raised a finger. "Education ain't about stuffing heads. It's about lighting fires. And you don't need a fancy title to hold the match." When she finished, there was a moment of stunned silence, then thunderous applause. Delegates stood, clapping, some even cheering. Cameras flashed. Kevin felt tears sting his eyes. His teacher, his friend, the woman the world once overlooked, was now being heard by nations. Within hours, clips of Jean's speech exploded online. Hashtags trended. Hashtag MopWisdom. Hashtag Teach Sideways. Even late-night comedians quoted her. "Education ain't about stuffing heads, it's about lighting fires," one tweeted. "Some janitor just outperformed every politician I've ever heard." By December 2026, schools across the U.S. were piloting sideways learning workshops. Teachers swapped tips on using humor and story. Some districts even invited Jean to train staff, though she always said yes only if she could be back at Lincoln by Monday morning. "Got floors to clean," she'd shrug. Charles didn't say much after the UN event. In fact, he said nothing at all. At first, Kevin thought his father was furious. But then he realized something stranger. Charles was quiet because he had lost. For once, money hadn't controlled the narrative. Influence hadn't bent the story. The world had chosen Jean. And Charles Bishop, master of legacy, had been outshined by a woman with a mop. On Christmas Eve 2026, Kevin and Jean sat in her small kitchen. The TV in the corner replayed her UN speech, subtitled in 10 languages. Kevin raised his glass of ginger ale. "You realize you just rewrote global education, right?" Jean shook her head. "Baby, I didn't rewrite nothing. I just told the truth in a way people could finally hear." Kevin leaned back, smiling. "That's the thing, Jean. The world doesn't just need leaders. It needs truth-tellers. And you're the best one I know." Jean looked at him for a long moment, then chuckled. "Well, I'll be damned. I guess this mop had more shine left in it than I thought." Later that night, Kevin walked home under the crisp December sky, snow crunching under his shoes. He thought about where he'd been only 3 years ago. Failing, lost, crushed under expectations. And now, he was standing in a world forever changed by the woman who had once swept his school hallways. He smiled, whispering into the cold air. "You did it, Jean. You lit the fire." Above him, the city lights sparkled like sparks from a story still burning.